And then we will watch. So today I did in Mrs. Robles's class a little like a shared experience so you guys could sort of see it. It's not perfect again, but you'll be able to watch that. And then we'll talk about some virtual tips. We'll have our closure and feedback time like always. And then if you would like to stay for the additional hour of planning, you can. Okay, so moving into the test prep hub. So you guys know that typically when you have a unit within your sequence of unit, you have the at a glance. Well, because there were so many grade levels, I decided instead to sort of create one place that had all of the materials for all the grade levels. Also, so that there was a very specific reason why I did the text the way I did. And I'll talk to you guys about that right now when we get into the website. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the website. And I'm just going to walk you through what you can find on here. So this is our test prep hub. Right now, it has the materials that you'll need for the TC units, as well as a little bit of information in underneath CASP and tech support. These two areas haven't been as developed yet, so just kind of know that going into it. So when you come down, you have the TC test prep units, and these are your options. They're the same as the drop-down menu, so you can go in either way. You'll have your units, which we'll look at, the grade level text. These are the two that you'll most likely use the most. The schedule, a little bit of information on the shared experience, which I'll be adding the video that we did today. At some point, I'll add that to the site. The centers and the games and the additional resources. So we're going to look first at the units, and then we will look at the text. So within the units, you'll find two documents that are going to be important for your grade level for both reading and writing. So you have the actual test prep unit, as well as you have the organizers. The organizers were a tool that the TOSAs have been making for the last couple of years. So Elma, Nicole, Angela, and myself, mostly Elma, Nicole, and Angela. So we've been doing these organizers, and basically what they are is they just break down the mini lessons, and it gives you the article linked to it, as well as the anchor charts that might be useful in order to support that mini lesson. So it's pretty much like a cheat sheet or a quick way to get to the text that you need. Couple disclaimers on that. So sixth grade, you do not have a organizer because the organizer that you guys had went with a prior unit. So I did delete that because you need your reading and your writing unit to correspond. So I did just go ahead and delete that. So I apologize, sixth grade, and then middle school teachers, you guys also do not have the test prep organizers, but you do have your units. So that is where you're going to find your unit. At the very beginning, you'll see that there are mini units for like third grade. If you want to start with a mini unit, your kids are not used to testing. This is sort of the equivalent of like a up the ladder that you would do prior to doing an actual unit. And then if you think you want to access anchor charts that other grade levels that apply it to other grade levels, you can access them just by clicking in here. It will take you to the grade level anchor charts. Now let me go ahead and go back. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the TC test prep. So if you come into the text, you'll see that there's text underneath each level. The reason why I went ahead and added this page because this is all linked in your test prep organizer, but I wanted you guys to be able to have access to text from other grade levels. So let's say if you're a fifth grade teacher and you have students that are reading at a third grade level, you can have them do some of the practice work with, for instance, the text from the third grade level. When you click on these links, it's going to take you to a folder that has all of the text in them. Now, later, right now, this might all feel a little bit like out of context because we haven't looked at the units in depth yet. Most likely you've taught them before, so this hopefully won't feel too out of context. But the reason why I think it's really beneficial for you guys to have the whole folder like this is because what you can do is you can add this to your drive. You add the shortcut to your drive, and then through Google Classroom, you can assign these texts from any of these folders. So that's just something to be thinking about. And we'll talk more about like, okay, logistically, how can this happen in a digital environment? We'll talk more about that as we go along. But again, you have your fiction text, your narrative nonfiction text, and your nonfiction text for 3rd through 8th grade. Okay. Now, you're welcome to look through here. There's a section on the centers and the games. We're going to talk a little bit about all of that and you know, sort of asking ourselves the question, like, is our centers and games something that we even want to try to do? What is this going to look like in distance learning? Okay, so let me go back into full screen. So later you guys can, you know, take some time and look through that. And actually, let me real quick share this with you in the slides. I mean, in the chat, so that you guys are able to access the slides. There you go. And yes, I see somebody put the slides in the website in the chat. Thank you for doing that.
Meg, it's not showing up. Did you share it with everyone or everyone in the waiting room?
No, apparently I shared it with just Janet. Oh. So she has it. Let me do that again. There you go. Okay, so now we're going to get into talking about how are these units actually structured. And again, there's probably a lot of you guys that have taught these units before, but I don't know about you, but even though I've taught them a couple times, it was like I was seeing it all for the first time. You know, there's just so much has happened. We didn't do this last year, so we're 1 year removed from it. So when we're looking at the path of the reading units, so the reading units follow 3 bends, basically. So the first bend is the narrative fiction bend. So you're going to be focusing just on regular fiction. And then the second bend is our narrative nonfiction bend. And then the last bend, kids will be working with expository nonfiction. Now, when we look at the actual units, so if you click on the units, this is what you're going to find within most of the units. So you'll have most of the reading units. So you'll have your important principles. They will talk a little bit about the genre, and there's a section that has questions. And this section is really useful because it's telling you the type of questions that will be used on the SBAC for that genre. So you'll want to take a look at that section. And then they'll have an orientation to the unit, just like they normally do. And then they'll have this small group overview piece that can give you some ideas of what are some small groups that you might want to do. Now, when you actually get into the bend, so that was the beginning of the bend. When you get into the bend, you're going to have the kinds of questions. Actually, I mentioned that above. So you will start each reading unit with a shared experience. I don't know how many of you guys remember these, but they're basically like a glorified interactive read aloud. It's a interactive read aloud on steroids because it is scheduled to take approximately 45 to 60 minutes for the shared experience. Now, I know you're all thinking, how is that going to work? The shared experience that me and Ms. Robles did today was a condensed version. So what you're going to see in the video is what it could look like in a condensed version. So we'll talk about that as well. And then you're going to have mini lessons. Now, in the reading unit, there's about anywhere from like 6 to 10 mini lessons per bend, but you're only going to choose 3. So you need to have some conversations, maybe with your grade level, with your team. What are our money mini lessons? So where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? Most likely it's going to be main idea. It's going to be and details. It's going to be mini lessons that are talking about part to whole. So which mini lessons do you say either A, this is something that's going to come up on SBAC a lot and I want to cover it, or B, this is something that my kids struggle with and they need another chance at it, or something we haven't gotten to that I think that they'll need. At the end of each unit, you'll have a small group and centers overview and you'll have an appendix. Okay, and again, there are a few little differences between grade levels, but these are the main things. Now, when you get into the writing units, it's completely different. It's not set up at all on the same schedule. The writing units are just like a basic unit, a basic curricular calendar. And the idea with the writing units is that you would go through each mini lesson. So you will start with like a welcome to the unit, an overview. You'll have like a little introduction at the beginning of each bin that's going to tell you what to expect in that bin. But then you go straight into those mini lessons. And at the end, you'll still have your appendix with the resources for the unit. Okay, so basically, to summarize, the writing units are very similar to your curricular calendar. They're 4 bins and they go through narrative, informative, opinion, and short response. Short response is the first bin. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about schedules. So this first schedule is what is recommended in the TC units. Okay, so I want to go over this because it is what you're actually going to see in the TC units. However, I'm going to show you a modified one that you might want to consider, but I at least want to go over this. Okay, so day 1 is your shared experience. And then they recommend that day 2 and day 3 are your mini lessons. Those would be like, in a perfect world, those would be a quick 10-minute mini lesson. And then the rest of the time, students would be doing partner work. Okay, and don't get too worried about partner work. We'll talk about that in a second. Day 4, they recommend having that day be completely small group and centers. And then day 5, they recommend something called a reading marathon. So the idea behind a reading marathon is that our kids are not used to sitting, and they are a little bit more used to it now, but than they were a couple years ago, but they're not used to sitting and reading a text on a screen for an extended period of time. And so what happens is they get fatigue when they go to take the test, right? They just get tired. They get tired from reading and then they start rushing through it, and then their scores are not representative of what they are actually capable of doing. So what this reading marathon is you're basically trying to build the stamina of your students reading online. Now, they recommend that you don't just use test prep text during this time. I'm going to be honest, when I did this with my students, I only used the test prep text because I felt like it's one thing to read a story on Epic. It's a whole other thing to read a test prep story for 60 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever. They're not near as engaging. But the only thing I would say is I personally would not recommend allowing them to read regular books during that time. And I know that there's going to be people that disagree with me on that, but I think that they need to be reading from a screen because that's what they're going to be doing. So they could, if you're going to have them read a book on a digital book, that's fine. But it needs to be screen reading, because if we're trying to build the stamina, it's not really building the stamina if it's not transferable to what they're going to be doing on the test. Now, what I would recommend making a change on is it looking a little bit more like this. So Monday could be your shared experience. I would cut out centers because I just think logistically it's going to be complicated. If you wanted to do some of the games just for fun, you could do that. But I think the shared experience is potentially going to take you 1 to 2 days. So, I mean, ideally, it would only take you 1 day, but I just think that you're going to need those extra days for mini lessons. So, I would recommend doing Monday shared experience, Tuesday, whole group instruction mini lesson, Wednesday mini lesson, Thursday mini lesson, and then Friday can be your marathon reading day. And that's the day where you're basically monitoring that they are reading and coaching it. This is where it would be really nice if you were using Zoom to be able to do those breakout rooms, but if not, then however you can make that work. And then on all of these days after the mini lesson, except I probably should remove these two because the shared experience day, that's going to take your whole block. But on all of these days, ideally, you would be following this up with small group work. So taking a test prep text and doing the work that you're doing with them in the mini lessons, doing it in a small group. Now for writing, you're just going to be doing mini lessons every day. And almost every day they're going to be drafting or writing or doing something. So that just follows a typical schedule like you would always do on any other normal unit. All right, so let's talk about the shared experience. And let me go back real quick and see how I'm doing on time. 3:10. Okay, I'm ahead. All right. So the shared experience is very much like an interactive read aloud, but it does have a distinct structure in that you're reading the text twice. So you start with a quick introduction. And by introduction, I mean you're reading the little directions at the top of the text, because all those test prep texts, you know what I'm talking about, they have the directions that will say like, read the story, blah, 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 and then answer questions, da, da, da. And then you're reading that little introduction. It's normally like one paragraph in bold right underneath. And you're asking the kids like, what kind of text is this? What do I know so far? You could go over if there's text features. If it's a nonfiction text, then you could go over the text features. You could look at the pictures. So you're essentially doing a book introduction, like a book walk kind of, except with a much less engaging test prep text. Then you're going to go into that first read aloud for the gist. So during this time, you would be reading with expression. You aren't stopping a lot of times, but you'll stop like once or twice. You're reading the first part, and then you're showing the students how to like skim the rest of it, which is a very hard skill, by the way, and especially for younger readers. And then at the end of that, you're doing some literal understanding. So like, what do we know has happened so far? Now, you guys, just to pause real quick, this is the regular shared experience. Right after this, I'm going to recommend to you a condensed version that I think will fit better in distance learning, okay? But I want you to see the regular version. Then after you do that, you begin the second read aloud. And this is where you're digging in. You're teaching them to annotate. You're teaching them to think about what it is they're reading. You're using a chart to support their thinking. So like if it's a fiction story, they will give you a fiction chart in your unit. It will show you exactly which chart to use. And you're using that chart to sort of like guide the thinking of the kids. So you're reading with a question in mind. What do we think about as fiction readers? And then you're giving the students opportunity for them to practice. That's obviously going to be the hard part in distance learning. And I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the ways that that could be done after we watch the video. And then you'll decide how long you want to do that until you turn it over to the kids. So like my kids are ready to go, do it for a couple paragraphs, or my kids need more support. They're not ready to do this by themselves. I'm going to keep going with them whole class. And then the last piece is the multiple choice questions. So explicitly teaching students the strategies for answering the questions. So teaching them like, okay, let me read the question. does it tell me in the question where in the text I need to look at? Okay, so now I'm going to go there. What exactly is it asking me to do? So where do I look? What is it asking me to do? Which of these answers are obviously wrong? Which of these answers might be right? So you're basically teaching them those test taking skills of analyzing a question and determining what the correct answer is, but you're doing it scaffolded because you're guiding them in it. All right, so all of that normally would take 45 to 60 minutes to do. But I realize that you guys don't have that time in your blocks due to our number of minutes that we have in a day. So here is my suggestion for a condensed version, and hopefully I won't get in trouble with TC for, messing with their way of doing it. But this is what I think is probably realistic for what we're doing. So the first is go ahead and do your introduction. So read the directions, be really brief about it, and just sort of summarize. When I did the sample lesson with Brenda's class today, I sort of made a mistake the first time because I was trying to get the kids involved in this first part. I learned from that, like, no, just guide them through it, that first part. Get through that first part because you want to get to the actual text. Then this is where I would really cut back, is in that first read aloud. I do think that it's important for the kids to have that first read aloud. And again, you're not reading through the whole text, you're just reading through a portion of it. But I would go ahead and teach them to read aloud. I probably would maybe stay away a little bit from the skimming, just because I think that that's a skill that students need to acquire, and you might not get as much bang for your buck out of that. But I would definitely read it, and read it with expression so that they're able to sort of have an idea of what's going on in the text. Then in the second read aloud, this is where you would invest more of your time. So you're still going to show them the chart. You're going to sort of direct them to be thinking about that kind of work. And then you're going to be reading with that question in your mind, like what is something that we see in fiction writing or in fiction reading? What are we thinking about? And then you're going to give them that opportunity for practice, and then decide when they're going to do the reading. And then lastly, with the multiple choice questions, still the same. You just might not go through as many. You might only make it through one question. Okay, so we're going to watch this. There are mistakes in it. There are things that I did not do right that I think I should have done differently. But I do think it will give you an idea of what it could look like. And I am going to fast forward through some of the coaching parts because we have, let me see, let me just see what time we need to be done with this.
Okay, readers, so this week,
give me 1 second. So 3:35 is the next part. Okay, so actually we're ahead. So we might be able to get through a little bit more of this. So here we go.
okay, readers, so this week we are going to work together. We're going to start studying and practicing responding to test questions, and we're going to be focusing on narrative passages. So the passages typically are going to be either fiction or historical fiction. And remember, when I say passage, what I really mean is a text, right? A text that you're asked to read. So the first,
and by the way, you guys, this is all scripted out in the actual lesson for the shared experience. And you can't even tell, but I'm reading it from the lesson. So, so just so you know,
the thing we always want to do whenever we're looking at a text is we want to start by reading the directions and by reading the summary. Sometimes there will be a summary, sometimes there won't. But it will always give us clues as to what type of thinking work we're going to do when we start reading this text. So let's go ahead and do that together. So it says, read this story. As I'm reading here, you guys follow along, okay? It says, read this story, then answer questions 19 through 23. Okay, so I'm already going to start to gather a little bit of information. So I know it's a story, which means that it's either fiction or fantasy or historical fiction. It's something that is a story or not true. Now let's go ahead and read the summary. It says, while on vacation with his parents and digging for dinosaur fossils, Benny makes a surprising discovery. Young boys are not the only creatures who lose teeth. Okay, so Alexander, who do we know one of the characters is going to be?
Benny.
Benny, good. So we already know that in this story, one of the characters will be Benny, who's a boy on vacation with his parents, and he's in a place where there's dinosaur fossils. So he's probably not at the beach in Florida, okay? And I wonder where they're going to dig for these fossils. Like it's probably not going to be in a city, maybe in the woods or in a desert. And it says that Benny makes a surprising discovery that has something to do with losing teeth. So now we have an idea of how the story is going to go, and we're ready to begin to read it for the first time. So when we read it through the first time, we're just going to be reading it to get the gist. I'm going to read it with expression, and I'm going to read it out loud, and you're going to follow along, okay? Reading it in your head at the same time that I'm reading it aloud. Are you ready to read it together, this story? Give me a thumbs up. All right, here we go. Digging for Dinos by Sharnon
Okay.
Simon.
For the sake of
Digging
time,
for
I'm gonna
dinosaurs
fast
was
forward
hot
past me
work.
reading it.
Benny sat back on his heels and took a long drink from his water bottle too. Dave crouched beside Benny. Okay, so now pretty slow. Dave nodded. Yep, he agreed. It's hard work. Sometimes paleontologists and fossil hunters look for weeks without finding anything, and we hardly ever find a whole skeleton. He added, you know, Ben, if you're tired of searching, you can always help someone else on the crew. Okay, so now that we've read it the first time, and I only read halfway through, you'll see on page 2 is the rest of the story. But now that we read through it the first time to get the gist of what's happening in the story, now we're ready to go back and we're ready to read it with a question in our mind. And when we're thinking about reading a story, there's some work that we might normally do. So let me show you what some of this work is. So first of all, you might want to think about who are the characters in the story. You might also want to think about what you know about them. Like, what are you learning about them? Where is the story taking place and why does that matter? Or also you could think about like, what's the big problem so far in the story? Or what's the solution in the story? So we're going to go ahead and start reading this story again, this time.
Little note, those of you guys that have used Jamboard in the past, you might remember that it used to be when you would push stuff to the side, it would disappear off Jamboard. They've updated that now. So it's kind of nice because you can like push the chart all the way to the edge and it will stop. It won't go off the deep end. So that's a nice way to be able to fit more things on your board because the kids can drag it over when they want to look at it and then drag it back.
Time with that in mind, and we're going to annotate as we're reading. I'm going to do this for a little bit and then I'm going to give you guys a chance to do this. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. Digging for dinosaurs was hot work. Benny sat back on his heels and took a long drink from his water bottle. At first, when Mom and Dad had told him they were going on a dinosaur dig for a vacation, he'd been excited. He bragged to his friends that he'd find the skeleton of a never before discovered dinosaur. The Benosaurus, they'd probably name it, but the real dig wasn't at all what he expected. For starters, he wasn't even digging. Okay, I'm gonna stop there. So let's think about what are some of the things that we're noticing or some of the thinking that we're doing when we're reading a story. Are we ready? I'm gonna choose yellow to highlight with. So it says here that he sat back on his heels and he took a long drink from his water bottle. What is that telling you about Benny? What is that telling you about Benny? Can you type in the chat what you're thinking about Benny right now?
I know you guys are thinking at the last PD, I said I didn't like typing in the chat, but they're
He's
typing in the chat.
tired. He's hot and thirsty. I'm thinking like he definitely is not seeming like a very hard worker right now. Says digging for dinosaurs was hot work. So, okay, let me go ahead and add one of your thoughts here. So he's tired and maybe even he's tired of working. And I'm just gonna add that right there. I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller because I know I'm gonna wanna add more thoughts. Okay, let's keep reading. He bragged to his friends that he'd find the skeleton of a never before discovered dinosaur, the Benosaurus, they'd probably name it, but the real dig wasn't at all what he expected. Okay, so let's go back to our chart. I'm thinking that we could do some thinking work around the problem. What is the problem? So what I'm going to do right now, you guys, I'm going to put you in a breakout room. Listen very carefully. You're going to have 1 minute to talk with your partner.
I lied. They had
Only
like
1
4.
minute. And listen to this part very carefully. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see me. When you come back from talking with your partner, I'm going to call on 2 people and I'm going to have you tell me what your partner said. Not what you shared, what your partner shared. So make sure when you go into the room right now that you make sure your partner tells you something so that when you come back, you're ready to share something. Does that sound good? So the question is, what is the problem so far in the story? Okay, are you ready? Let me get you guys in breakout rooms and all right, 1 minute. All right, girls, go for it. So who's gonna start? Let's say I think the problem in the story is, Abby, you start. Go ahead and try.
So I think that the big problem so far from what we read was that it wasn't at all like he expected. Because
Camila, sweetie. And
Take
so
your mic.
like what I was, oh, whoops, sorry. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'll go back to it. But what you'll see that I'm doing is I'm hopping in and out of rooms. Like I'm not even finishing, like letting them talk before I hop into another room. I'm just trying to get them going because when you walk in there, they're not going, right? Like, I mean, there was one room I went into that they were going, and you'll see them. But let me try to get back there. But it's really you're trying to get into as many rooms as you can just to get them talking, like as fast as you can.
Abby, you start. Go ahead and try.
so I think that the big problem so far from what we read was that it wasn't at all like he expected. Because
Camila, sweetie, take your microphone off. Okay, so I think the problem in the story is, Evelyn, you start us off, sweetie.
That he was really tired and sad that the dinosaur dig was not what he thought.
Great. Camilla, your turn.
so
Actually, no, I'm going to write it differently.
okay.
We thought it
This
was,
was the group that was talking.
we thought he was going to dig quickly and easily.
Great job, guys. I love these conversations.
But thank you.
Okay,
But
so
Hi.
Hey. Okay, so I think the problem in the story is, Frank, I think the problem in the story is, Axel, what do you think, bud?
I think the problem in the story is that they won't be able to find any certain dinos or like fossil.
Good. Okay, good. Okay, your turn, Frank. Romina and Gilbert, if you guys have your cameras off, you're gonna have a really hard time talking to each
So
other.
I want to touch on this real quick.
So,
You, obviously we can't force the kids to turn their cameras on, right? But you could like, you can sort of like suggest it, and like, if they want to, then great. You know, sometimes they just need that little like, it's not that they're uncomfortable with it off, they just have gotten used to it, you know? So it's okay if you're like, you guys, you might want to think about turning your cameras on so you can see each other while you're talking. And boy, does that help when they're in partners.
Gilbert, your turn first. I think the problem in the story is,
Like you saw, they all turned it on like fast, you know?
Benny doesn't want to work. He just wants to find the phone so he can show off to his friends. Oh, nope.
good job.
We lost one there.
Okay. Okay, so everyone's back. So I don't know if you noticed how much of a difference it was when you guys put your video cameras on, you were in your partner room. You have your videos off while you're talking with a partner. It's really hard to have a conversation because you don't know who's going to talk first. So I really encourage you when if you can, when you are in.
That's why he got hot and tired. So
Okay,
that's
we're
why he
gonna
had to
keep
drink almost like
going for
whole
the sake
water.
of time.
Good. Okay, Gilbert, what did you say
Oh.
the problem in the story? What
Let
problem
me-
in the story?
So this is me
the
calling out on two
problem in the
kids.
story that we both decided on, that we saw in the story was that he thought the digging would be easy, but once he started digging and digging, it was harder and even harder. That's why he got hot and tired. So that's why he had to drink almost like the whole water bottle.
Good. Okay, Gilbert, what did you say the problem in the story was?
Well, I think the problem in the story is he just wants to show off to his friends so he could be cool in school. He did not think that that the work would be so hard.
Okay, so Gilbert, can you tell me, now that you're looking at my screen, can you tell me one line that you think I should highlight and that we should annotate that shows the problem of the story?
So I'm trying to get them like redirected back to the text.
Think digging for dinosaurs was hot work.
Okay, digging for dinosaurs was hot work. That's part of the problem. What else? Let me see. Alexander, can you choose for me one piece of evidence that shows what the problem was?
It shows how Gilbert said it.
Any problem that you think, just show me a piece
Oh,
of evidence.
okay. But the real dig wasn't at all what he expected.
Yeah, right? Okay, so I'm definitely seeing in here the problem that you guys were talking about, which was that the dig was a lot harder. Actually, let me put here, the problem is that the dig was a lot harder than he thought. And also somebody might choose to put that it was a problem that they weren't finding anything, right? Okay, so now you've seen how I've started to annotate this story. It's going to be your turn now. So you're going to keep going. You're going to work with the rest of paragraph 2 or paragraph 3, 4, or any of this page. You're just going to work on this page for right now. Okay, so go ahead and go into your other tab. I'm going to be looking at your assignment.
Let me pause real quick to let you know that prior to this lesson, I had shared with them a copy of this Jamboard. So they each had their own copy of this exact Jamboard in their Google Classroom. And then before we started the shared experience, we had them open up the Jamboard so it would be ready in another tab. So it wasn't like, okay, now go into Google Classroom and open it up, and because that all takes time, right? So they had this open in another tab already, and they had opened it from their Google Classroom. Now we're going to get into the part right now where they're working and we're kind of coaching them and sort of regañándoles whenever they're not on task. So we might watch a little bit of it and then I'll fast forward through some of it. I know some of the feedback from you guys last time said we didn't need to see all the coaching. So I will be responsive to that.
And I will be able to see your work as you're doing it. Go ahead and begin now reading and thinking about what is some of the thinking work I can do. You can highlight or you can write sticky notes. Go ahead and begin now.
It's supposed to be a Jamboard where you can see everybody's annotations or just your own?
Just yours. It's just yours. Yep.
Okay.
So then just like the management of what this would look like, I'm going to turn the volume down on this for a second. So the management of what this would look like is you probably would have Go Guardian open and watching to see that they're starting. You can see it here. So you can see in this video, like you can see it here. Let me turn up the volume.
Earlier. So let's skip down to paragraph 3.
But I definitely,
look
Miss
at
Robles
paragraph
was
3.
definitely like in the back watching Go Guardian, like telling the kids, you know, get going, get
Okay.
on the right page.
So Isaiah, I see that you're highlighting like kind of feelings, like he's hopeful, he's bored. Go ahead and add a sticky note that shows what that's telling you about him. And Romina, so I see that you highlighted, sometimes paleontologists and fossil hunters look for weeks without finding anything.
I'm gonna fast forward a
So
little
go
bit.
ahead. Jonathan.
I'm just
Bones?
kind of like,
Agree. I was thinking the same thing, that he's a positive, that Dave is really a positive person,
if you want to watch this part later, you can.
that you can see me.
Okay, so here we go. So now they've worked on it for a
Okay.
while.
Okay, you guys, go ahead and come back to Zoom. And once you are back, give me a thumbs up that you can see me.
This next part is where I when I was saying earlier, there's some things I should have done differently. There's a few little pieces that I think I didn't do right in this section, but you can get an idea of what it could look like.
Okay, readers. So the important thing is that we've started reading the text. We've done some thinking work around it. And now we're ready to answer some multiple choice questions that the test makers are going to ask you, or things that they think are important. Okay, so we're going to try one together. And remember, when we do this, we're looking for the best answer. Sometimes there's more than one answer that makes sense, but we are looking for the best answer. So let's go ahead and do one of these questions together. So let me just bring this to the front. All right, it says, based on paragraphs 2 and 7, a paleontologist is a person who mainly, now we have 4 possible answers, and we're gonna look at these 4 answers, and let's find first the 2 answers that we know are wrong. Okay, there's typically one that's obviously wrong, like we say that's an ow answer, like ow, that's like really wrong, okay? And then there's a wrong answer, and then there's 2 that sometimes will feel right. So let's look. So a paleontologist is a person who mainly A, digs deep in the ground, B, studies ancient animal bones, C, leads a big team, or D, finds complete animal skeleton.
Now, what I did wrong here that I should have done is I should have told them to look that it says like based on paragraphs 2 and 7. I should have had them go to paragraphs 2 and 7 and read those. And it just slipped my mind. But always, if it tells you where to look, you want to teach the kids to go back there and look.
Okay, so what is the answer that we know is wrong? Completely wrong.
Literally.
Which one? You can just type A, B, C, or D. So I am agreeing with some of what you guys are saying, and I think that C.
So you can't see it, but in the chat, they're putting their letters, and there was a lot of different letters. They definitely weren't all on the same page, but that's okay.
Is obviously wrong, because you don't necessarily have to have a big team in order to do that. Okay, so now let's look, which one do we think is also wrong? Digs deep in the ground, studies ancient animal bones, finds complete animal skeletons. Let's go right to here where it says no shovels. Dave, the paleontologist in charge, told them any dinosaur bones buried here should be within a couple feet of the surface. We don't want to risk clunking around and breaking them. So which one of those do you think is wrong based off what I just read? Some of you put, I see a lot of you putting A and a lot of you putting D. So yeah, from that section, based off paragraphs 2 and 7, we know that they're not digging deep in the ground. Let's read paragraph 7 now, because it's telling us to read in paragraph 2 and paragraph 7.
That's
let's
where I
read paragraph
remembered
7.
that.
Dave nodded. Yep, he agreed. It's hard work. Sometimes paleontologists and fossil hunters look for weeks without finding anything. And we hardly ever find a whole skeleton, he added. You know, Ben, if you're tired of searching, you can always help someone else on the crew. So what's the other one that's wrong based on paragraph 7?
Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you feel like you kind of got the idea and you're ready to move on. I know it's long. So let me go ahead and stop that. So basically we finish answering that question and then we wrapped it up. We told them, you know, that this is the work that they're going to be doing. Okay. So now we're going to get into, now everyone's tired because that was a long lesson. Imagine if it was 60 minutes, which is what it's supposed to be. That was only 23. Okay, so now the hard part. So how do we do this virtually? So there's a couple things to think about. The first is, how do we get the documents to them? So there's two types of documents that we're getting to them. There's the ones that we're working with in the lessons. So for instance, the one you just saw that was actually in the shared reading, but then after our shared experience, but then after the mini lesson, what they do is the kids have to then work independently on texts. So you need to get those texts to them also. So there's the text that they're working with you in the mini lesson or in the shared experience. And then there's a set of texts that they're working with independently, however that's going to look in our distance learning environment. So do we want to share those in Google Classroom with them? Are we going to give them the link to the website? Are we going to make a Google Doc with the links in them? How are we going to share the docs? I think the easiest way would be Google Classroom, but you have to fill out what works for you and for your class. Annotating. This is a big one. How are our kids going to annotate the test? Now, there's a couple things to think about. When I was teaching these units in 6th grade, I had my kids do a split screen with the text on one side and the Google Doc on the other side. And the reason I did that was because I felt like it was what was closest to what they were going to be experiencing on the actual SBAC test. They have like the text on one side, and then they have that little note-taking, you know what I'm talking about, the little notepad. So it's like they just have a little notepad and they can type into there. So that's very, very different from like when we would print the text out for them and then they would like annotate in the columns or put a sticky note on it or whatever, right? So what was happening was kids they knew how to do the work, but they didn't know how to transfer it to the test. Now, here's sort of the devil's advocate to this, is that you can think that these mini lessons are still trying to teach them. So there's a point where it's like, you're wanting to teach them how to transfer this to the test, but there's also a point where it's like, you're wanting it to just teach them the actual content. So it's kind of a delicate line, and you have to decide what you want to do and what's going to work best for your students. Now, the reason why I ended up deciding to do the Jamboard was because of the highlighting option. And my Nestor 3rd and 4th grade teachers, if you're here, you're probably thinking, wait, but you told us not to do that. I started really thinking about it. And if there's two functions that kids have in the SBAC, they can highlight and they can take notes in the notepad. Both of those are tools that they're able to do in the actual SBAC test. Unfortunately, like if you haven't started the trial account for Cami, they could highlight with Cami, but a lot of teachers I know activated that like at the beginning of the year, so it's probably expired by now. Although, by the way, you can sign up for it with your .org account and get a new one. But I didn't want to count on that because I didn't know what you guys were gonna have access to. So for Jamboard, especially for the shared experience, I'm not suggesting necessarily that you do it with every text because that would be a lot of work. But for the shared experience, I do think it facilitates the being able to highlight and as well the being able to annotate. Does it transfer exactly to how they're going to be seeing the test? Not necessarily, but it's definitely a good way. Now, another thing you're going to want to think about is when I do the shared experience, do I want them all to have their own copy? Like, are we working on the same thing? What's that going to look like? So you saw the way that I chose to do it, but whatever works best for you. The next thing you need to think about is scheduling. So the length of the lessons in general is going to have to be condensed because, and you saw how I condensed it, but even at that, it was still, you're still looking at a 30-minute to 40-minute block, which is not really what most of you guys have for your reading blocks right now. So maybe the questions get saved for the second day. Maybe that shared experience becomes a 2-day, but just know if you do that, you're going to have to sacrifice one of the mini lessons. So I think, you're going to have to feel it out and think about, how long is your block and what you're going to be able to do within that block. And the biggest thing is just keep it concise, just like as much as you can. Try to keep it, try not to over teach. Like I do that sometimes, and then lastly, what is the active participation going to look like? Are we going to do partnerships in the rooms? If we are going to do partnerships, if we haven't been doing those, like let's say we're in Google Meet, well, if you're not using breakout rooms, then that's probably not going to work. So how will the kids respond? Will it just be in the chat? Will it be on the Jamboard if you're using a Jamboard? But if you're not using a Jamboard, then what will it look like? You saw in the example today, like what it could look like if they did go into breakout rooms. And are they all going to be talking in their rooms? Definitely not. But at least the ones you get into, the rooms you get into, you can coach them. And as you're continuing to do that, I would hope that it gets easier every time. And like the way that I did it automatic. So it was random. They just went into rooms and I just started popping in. I only knew a couple of those kids. So, you just do the best you can when you get in there to get them talking. And then in this case, I definitely think the chat works really well for the multiple choice questions. Gets a little more complicated when you're working with some of those short responses, so that might look a little different. That might be a little more teacher guidance. So these are some of the things that you're going to need to think about. Okay. We are right on time. It's 3:45. I know this was a ton of information, and I think this is the most talking I've ever done in a PD because I feel really tired right now. So that tells me I'm talking way too much, but I am going to give you guys the feedback link because I need you to fill this out because every time I am always like, fill it out, but then like half of the people fill it out. But I do need you to fill this out because I need to know what else you guys need moving forward. I know it's a lot. You need a lot probably right now. And that's okay. But this will sort of give me an idea. So let me put this link for the feedback form in the chat. We are going to take 5 minutes right now to do this before we move on to the next part. And 2 minutes. We're going to take 2 minutes. Okay, go ahead and do that now.
Megan, is there a sign-in? Did I miss, is there a sign-in sheet for this? TD?
The feedback form is your sign-in.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So while you guys are opening that up, I'm just going to tell you what's going to come next for those of you that are choosing to stay for the additional hour of planning. So the first thing is going to be, I'm going to be here for questions because I'm sure you have a lot of questions right now. So I will be in the main room for questions until there's no more questions. Then those of you guys that don't have questions and you want to stay to plan, the breakout rooms are already open actually. So you could go ahead and move into that breakout room in just a second, not quite yet. And you could begin planning with people from your grade level. Now, if you're like, I want to plan, but just with my team, I've added like a bunch of extra rooms. You and your team could just go into a room by yourself. You do have to be here for that paid hour of planning, just for fiscal service purposes. What are some of the things that could happen during that planning? You could just get familiar with the units, like where everything is, what the texts are, look at the organizer. You could also plan out your shared experience. There's three or sometimes three, I think, shared experiences in the units. If there's a group of you in there, you guys could divide and conquer, and you could create the different Jamboards so they're ready to go. So you don't have to do that later. Could look like that. It also could be you just starting to add these documents to your Google Classroom and starting to get that ready for your kids. Or again, it's just reading through the unit and taking your time. You could work by yourself in a breakout room. So the time will be yours to plan. And if you are not going to be here for the whole time of planning, I need you to put what time, the time that you arrived and the time that you left in that feedback form, okay? And that's it. If you're not planning on staying for the planning time, then you're free to go. Otherwise, you could at this point move into a breakout room, or if you have any questions, I'm available.